Okay, time for chapter 4, Just Because I'm Black. Spring began early in Alabama, and the warm, sunny afternoon of March 2nd, 1955 blanketed the air with the scent of magnolia blossoms. Claudette and her classmates made their way from school to the Dexter Avenue and Bainbridge Street bus stop to wait for the bus. With a discount pink coupon slip, students could ride for half price, a nickel rather than the dime other passengers paid. The green and gold city bus pulled up to their stop, and Claudette boarded the steps and handed her coupon and nickel to the driver. There were no white people on the Highland Gardens bus that afternoon, so the students were allowed to walk straight through to the seats for black riders in the back, rather than getting off the bus and re-entering through the back door. Claudette took a seat midway down the aisle next to the window and piled her school books on her lap. Her classmates filled in the seats behind her, next to her, and across the aisle. As the bus made its way through downtown Montgomery, white riders began boarding at each stop and quickly filled the front seats. Claudette looked up to see a white woman standing at the row where she and her classmates were seated. In other cities with segregation laws like Atlanta and Nashville, there were also black and white sections, but black people didn't have to give up their seats when the white sections were filled. But Claudette only knew the rules in Montgomery, and she knew that if all the seats for white riders were filled, then the black riders had to give up their seats for white passengers. But Claudette also knew what she'd learned in Miss Nesbitt's class about her rights as a citizen. She'd learned about people who took a stand for what they believed was right. Claudette wondered, if I paid for a seat on the bus like every other passenger, why should I be forced to move? Just because I'm black? She looked again at the white woman. She wasn't elderly like her mom or expecting a baby like her neighbor, Miss Hamilton, who had just boarded the bus and needed a seat to rest. When her classmates in the seats across the aisle got up and moved to ones farther back, Claudette made her decision. Harriet Tubman's hands were pushing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth's hands were pushing down on the other shoulder. I couldn't move, Claudette later recalled. "Why are you still sitting there?" she heard the bus driver yell from his seat as he glared at her in his rearview mirror. "Get up, gal!" But Claudette stayed right where she was. The bus kept moving, picking up more passengers, and then the driver stopped at the intersection of Bibb and Commerce Streets and flagged down 2 white police officers. White passengers began screaming at Claudette to move. The officers got out of their police cruiser and came aboard the bus. They spoke to the driver and quickly made their way toward the back and toward Claudette. Claudette had never seen anyone refuse to give up their seat, had never seen anyone talk back to a white police officer. As she watched the officers walking quickly back to her seat, she didn't know what would happen next, but she knew things would never be the same for her. The bus stood idling as black and white passengers sat silent, watching. When the officers reached her seat, one stood over Claudette and demanded, "Aren't you gonna get up?" Claudette gathered her courage and said through her tears, "It's my constitutional right to sit here as much as that lady. I paid my fare." Again, they demanded Claudette get up, and again she told them no. One of the officers grabbed her hands. The other grabbed her arm, and they pulled her out of her seat and into the aisle. Her school books tumbled onto the floor. As they dragged her backward down the aisle and off the bus, one of the officers kicked her. But Claudette continued to scream, "It's my constitutional right," all the way to the police cruiser. They shoved her into the back seat, cuffed her hands, and shut the door. Crying, Claudette became more and more afraid as she listened to officers of the law call her every horrible word white people called black people. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." Claudette began whispering the Lord's Prayer that she and Delphine used to recite by their bedside at night. And when she finished, she started in on the 23rd Psalm to block out the officers' hateful words. Even though Claudette was only 15 years old, a minor, they drove her to the city jail instead of to the juvenile facility. Instead of letting her make a phone call home to her parents, they led her straight to a jail cell. When they closed the door and locked her in, Claudette knelt on the hard cement floor of her cell and prayed some more. And that's where we'll stop.